First, it's a pleasure to be here today, this afternoon. Big thanks to Martin, Kylie, and the New Approaches team for putting together yet another incredibly impressive conference. I have the pleasure of opening the discussion on oral nicotine, which, as we've heard today, is the fastest growing nicotine product category in the United States. So I'm going to start today's talk with just a little bit of background and context and an update on what appears to be potentially FDA evolving policy, which is something that we don't often see in this space. We will then transition to a number of what we call lightning presentations from some of the most innovative companies in this category, and then come back together for a panel discussion. All right. So I think one of the upcoming company presentations is going to dive deeper into the long history of oral tobacco or smokeless tobacco, both in the US and around the world. But in short, as you know, smokeless tobacco has a very long history. It was in Sweden where we now have the modernized snus portioned pouch that was developed, and we saw the potential benefit to public health that can come from the availability of smokeless products when used as an alternative to combustible cigarettes. Similarly, in the United States, we have our own history that goes back centuries with respect to smokeless tobacco. And in the last few years, we have seen the onboarding of new nicotine formats in this space, which we'll be discussing today. Now, of course, when it comes to the United States, the backdrop is always against the fact that these products are highly regulated. And as many of you know here, of course, the regulation in place, the FDA's regulatory authority, comes from the 2009 Tobacco Control Act, which gave FDA the authority to regulate the manufacture, distribution, and marketing of tobacco products in this country. What came with that was the requirement, among other things, for pre-market authorization. So, of course, any new product in this space that is not grandfathered and therefore exempt from pre-market review is required to be authorized by the agency in order to be marketed legally. Of course, when it comes to the traditional tobacco leaf-containing smokeless products, many of those legacy products were grandfathered and therefore exempt from that pre-market review or capable of going through the substantial equivalence process to come to market. But when it comes to the modern products, the oral nicotine products, those products are of course considered deemed tobacco products. And because they are all new in the sense that they weren't around in that form in 2007, they are required to go through the most onerous pre-market pathway, which is the PMTA, the pre-market tobacco application. And we started seeing these products begin to emerge in the US in the 2010s and in the last few years. Many of those products, many of those brands that are coming from some of the larger companies are subject to pending applications with FDA. For those of you who follow this space, you may know that there have been several PMTA deadlines for products that contain tobacco-derived nicotine in September 2020, and then in May 2022, when Congress extended the definition of tobacco to include synthetic nicotine, there was another PMTA deadline in May of that year. And so many products are on the market subject to those pending applications under the idea that there is enforcement discretion from FDA. At this point in time, it's unclear if that is still FDA's policy, but there is still a perception in the market that there is some level of enforcement discretion for products subject to timely applications. Now, very quickly, what does it mean for a product to have to go through the PMTA process? Well, the standard that the statute has created is a very high standard. It's a population level based standard that requires the applicant to demonstrate that their product is appropriate for the protection of the public health. In my view, that's a very high standard, higher than even the drug standard for new pharmaceutical products, which require safety and effectiveness. Here we have a pathway that requires not only addressing the safety of the product on the individual consumer, but also assessing the potential impact that the availability of that product could have on the population of the country, considering both users and non-users in terms of with smoking cessation and initiation, and of course focusing on vulnerable populations like youth who may be likely to uptake products. So that is, here the little graphic here shows how complicated that typically is, how many subject areas. It's a multidisciplinary approach that costs millions of dollars to put together the robust data and reliable data that statute requires be included to meet the standard. Now, when it comes to oral tobacco or oral nicotine products, actually there's some good news, right? The good news is that these products have demonstrated for years that if enough evidence is there, FDA is willing to authorize these products. Back in 2015, we had the very first PMTA authorizations for the Swedish Match snus products. And a few years later, those same products were granted marketing risk orders, allowing them to market their product with claims of reduced risk relative to combustible cigarettes. And those data and those applications were based in part on decades of epidemiological data from the population and the impact of, for example, in Sweden, the impact that the availability of those products had on reducing smoking. And then even innovative formats started coming to market, and in 2021, we actually had an authorization for something called the Verve Chew, which as I understand was a similar to a gum, but it was a disc-shaped product that would be chewed and discarded. And based on the tox profile of that product, the low abuse liability, the low potential for youth appeal, that product received marketing authorization for both a mint flavor as well as, I believe, a tobacco flavor back in 2021. And then, of course, most recently, we had the very first nicotine pouch authorized by FDA at the beginning of this year in what was, I believe, the final approval or authorization under the Biden administration's FDA. And a bit of a surprising move. I don't think a lot of folks were expecting to see this happen on the cusp of the administration's switching over. But that product, of course, was one of the first actually popular products that actually was having market success. Typically, we've seen PMTAs authorized for products that don't really have a significant market share. But here we had a product that had a significant market share in the category, and of course, was coming in a variety of flavors, not just a mint or menthol flavor. So again, a bit of a groundbreaking situation there. And now, in the last few weeks, for those of you who have been following the news, we are getting a lot of information on what could be coming down the road with FDA. It was reported in the media that following meetings with several large tobacco companies, FDA has been considering a pilot program to fast-track the review of certain already pending nicotine pouch applications from Philip Morris, Altria, Reynolds, and Turning Point brands, with the expectation that those reviews would be complete by the end of this year. And then last week, FDA officially announced the program in order to, quote, ease manufacturers' research burden and to more efficiently review nicotine pouch applications. The products selected for the program will be subject, apparently, to an application process featuring streamlined and reduced reviews, more frequent communication between FDA staff and applicants, which is odd that that has to be something that needs to be talked about, but for those of you in the space, that's getting frequent communication from FDA has not always been easy. And FDA will apparently drop a requirement or requirements that manufacturers submit certain product-specific studies in several areas, again, reportedly, including potentially studies demonstrating a product's effectiveness in helping smokers cut back. So, and rather FDA could rely on the general research, which presumably is the published literature, with respect to nicotine pouches. Of course, this raises a number of important questions. Let me see if I can pull them up here. The questions are, is FDA potentially signaling that they could be changing or lowering the scientific standard to meet the APPH burden, right? As we just talked about, APPH has typically been based on the possibility of a marketed product being able to help combustible tobacco users, smokers, switch to less harmful alternatives. And if FDA is potentially signaling that switching studies are not required, well, how do you meet APPH? What types of data will be robust enough to both meet the standard of the statute and also be able to be processed in an efficient manner? FDA says in the reports that the most critical elements of the product category will be considered. Well, what does that mean? What are the most critical elements? What data will be required? How does one demonstrate the effectiveness for new flavors? So we have a number of ZYN flavors that have been authorized. Well, what if you're introducing a novel flavor? Will that have to go through some sort of specific study, or will the literature be enough? And of course, will this fast-tracked process, once it's gone through the pilot program, could it apply to other categories beyond pouches, right? We're going to be talking to some companies today that are developing very unique products in this space that I'm sure are going to want to take advantage of this streamlined process. So these are all questions that remain outstanding, and hopefully we'll get answers from FDA. But it does seem to signal that potentially FDA for years has avoided doing this, right? When it comes to e-liquids or vapor products, the industry has petitioned the agency numerous times trying to develop and come up with streamlined pathways to market, and the FDA has always been very hesitant. Now we see that this is now potentially an opportunity, at least for the oral nicotine category. Of course, the question is, can FDA do this legally? And of course, as a lawyer, I will tell you there are some questions here, and again, we'll see what happens, whether this results in rulemaking or a guidance document. But unfortunately, as always, I think we can anticipate that there will be litigation at some point. And most recently, so separate from this requirement to go through pre-market authorization, the question remains, will FDA continue to enforce, right? There has not been significant enforcement to date in the oral category. FDA's focus has primarily been on illicit vapor products, in particular Chinese disposable ends. And they have so far, when it comes to enforcement, not really taken a significant stance, despite the fact that there are many products on the market that don't have authorization. Of course, as I mentioned, some of which are pending PMTA review. There are reasons why FDA may choose not to significantly increase enforcement. Namely, as we've discussed today, these products are among the lowest risk when it comes to the continuum of risk. They don't have the same concerns when it comes to combustibles, obviously, and even vapor products. And currently, we have very low youth use of these products. Based on the National Youth Tobacco Survey and other national surveys, youth remains relatively low, I think under 2%. And so these are reasons why FDA may choose not to significantly increase enforcement of products that are unauthorized, because they do potentially see a benefit to these staying on the market. On that point, a couple of weeks ago, we also saw another announcement from FDA encouraging manufacturers to use or develop child-resistant packaging on their products. Now, what's interesting is that it seems like a common sense measure in order to avoid potential exposures to children, that products should be made as difficult as possible to open for young kids, et cetera. And that does seem to make, again, common sense. But what I want to highlight is the fact that if FDA truly thought that these products pose a significant risk to kids, they could have easily come out with a statement saying unauthorized pouches, because of that risk, should come off the market. And so if you read between the lines, there seems to be an implicit understanding that by focusing on the packaging and making this common sense move towards child resistance, that the FDA is acknowledging in a sense that these products do still provide a public health benefit and maybe should be allowed to stay on the market pending PMTA review. I don't want to read too much into that, but it's just some food for thought. Ultimately, though, I think, as we'll talk about in our first discussion here, child-resistant packaging and possibly age gating could become key factors, both in order to reduce the risk of enforcement, as well as increase the potential for marketing authorization. So with that, I am going to introduce Shem Baldeosingh from the Global Institute for Novel Nicotine, who's going to talk about the use of the pouch format and how it's evolving into multi-purpose platforms.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you, Azim, for that introduction. So fascinating in terms of child-resistant cans and packaging, so thank you also to the previous speaker. But I'd also like to start by thanking Kylie, Martin, Robert, Michelle, and the rest of the team for the opportunity and for their organization of what is a most interesting and engaging conference. Now, you would think, coming from the Global Institute for Novel Nicotine, in this third segment on innovations in oral nicotine and beyond, that I'll be focusing on nicotine. But instead, I should be walking you through what I see as the next evolution of oral pouches. And that is how a format that started with snus in 1973 and nicotine pouches in the mid-2010s is becoming a discrete, rapid-acting platform for functional microdosing, be it focus, calm, sleep, and even emerging therapeutic applications. Now, why does this matter? Nicotine pouches have proven the format in that they are portion, cellulose-based, spit-free, and easy to dose. That success has created a familiar and trusted delivery vehicle. So as consumer interest in wellness and microdosing grows, that same pouch format is being repurposed to deliver nootropics, adaptogens, sleep aids, and even next-gen therapeutic actives. And so I will take up your question at a later date on these. Now, what has that resulted in? We have now a discrete and fast-acting product that fits into daily routines. Morning for focus, afternoon for calm, and evening for sleep. And what can functional pouches deliver? We can break that down into those functional applications into 4 clear buckets. The first is cognitive and energy. And the ingredients that I look to here are alpha GPC, ceticoline, bacopa, lion's mane, rhodiola, caffeine, theobromine, and B vitamins. In terms of stress and mood support, there's, of course, L-theanine, ashwagandha, and cordyceps, and GABA. For sleep support, there's melatonin that we all know, L-theanine, GABA, valerian, chamomile, and magnesium. And in terms of the emerging therapeutic microdosing that we see, the ingredients that are under investigation are low-dose psilocybin analogs, lion's mane combinations, and niacin-assisted protocols. Now, this is not just speculative. This is what we are seeing the consumer needs in terms of focus, relaxation, and better sleep and low-dose therapeutic effects. Now, how come pouches are, how do we justify pouches as an effective delivery platform? We all know already it's the rapid absorption. The buccal sublingual delivery bypasses digestion and first-pass liver metabolism, so the effects can appear to be faster. Precision, in terms of a fixed portion control dosing that is ideal for microdosing protocols. Convenience, odorless, spit-free, discreet, easy to use at work, the gym, or even before bed. In terms of the tech and materials, I'll dwell on that a little bit later, but what we are seeing, as I spoke to Anand at Zanoprima, are advances in biodegradable, non-woven, control-reduced release matrices, pH buffering, and moisture-controlled fabrics that let formulators tune the duration and the stability. And these pouches, I believe, uniquely make pouches uniquely well-suited for everyday wellness microdosing. Now, what are the market and consumer signals that can be discerned? Nicotine pouches mainstream the format and scaled user acceptance. Functional pouches are still small, but growing fast. And this is helped by the wellness trend, the nootropic demand, and preference for discrete formats. Typical users are 25 to 45, urban, health conscious, motivated by quitting smoking, improving their productivity, and enhancing sleep. The usage patterns themselves tend to suggest stacking, where we have different pouches for morning focus, midday calm, and evening sleep. So what we can expect is a steady category growth. It will unlikely be as explosive as nicotine pouches uptake, but it will become a significant niche within the wellness and precision dosing category. Now, to the risk, I'll just very quickly cover off the risk and regulatory considerations. There's, of course, the regulatory pathways for non-nicotine functional ingredients that are simpler in some markets, but uncertain for novel therapeutics and psychedelic microdosing. In terms of labeling, claims, and safety data, this will be critical, especially as we look to mood and therapeutic claims. In terms of flavor, strength, and regulations, this, of course, will shift based on consumer behavior and could create unintended market consequences. As I mentioned before in speaking to Anna, there's also the sustainability expectations that are rising, especially in this 25 to 45 demographic. And so biodegradable pouches and responsible packaging will be the competitive advantage. So what we are seeing is that the need for proactive safety data, transparent communications, and early engagement with the regulators will help to reduce friction. So what does the near-term future look like? If we were to gaze into our crystal ball, what does the next 3 to 7 years look like? I think we will be seeing a lot more product diversification in terms of focus, calm, the sleep lines, along with the hybrid stacking that I mentioned. There seems to be a move also that this could be, we could be moving towards smart and personalized pouches. Now I'm seeing pouches that could be, or pouches and the doses that could be linked to apps and personalized formulations. There could well be controlled low-dose therapeutic trials and clinical partnerships for targeted indications, and I said that's for something for Sud and his colleagues to address. And as I believe, sustainability in terms of biodegradable materials and circular packaging as it gains standard market access status. So in short, pouches are moving from harm reduction tools to a broader platform for everyday precise wellness and potential therapeutics. So in closing, what I would say is that oral pouches give us a powerful, familiar delivery format that is fast, precise, discreet. That makes them an ideal vehicle for functional microdosing across focus, mood, sleep, and emerging therapeutic success, something that I think a few of us could use this afternoon at this moment. But the coming years will be about responsible innovation, solid safety data, smart manufacturing, regulatory clarity, and sustainable materials. And so this is where harm reduction experience will meet mainstream wellness opportunity. I thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Next, we have Kellsi Booth from Black Buffalo, who's going to talk about the evolution of the category in the US.
I'm Kellsi. I'm the Chief Legal Officer at Black Buffalo, and I'm so excited to be here with you all today talking about my favorite topic, tobacco harm reduction. Many thanks to the organizers for this fabulous event and for the opportunity to speak about the evolution of the oral product category. So, we're going to start with the history lesson. As you all know, various forms of smokeless tobacco are used throughout the world. Where smokeless tobacco use is most prevalent, it's rooted in cultural tradition. Think snus in Sweden or pan in India. Moist smokeless tobacco, which I'll call MST or dip, is a distinctly American experience, steeped in 250 years of tradition. Tobacco was the largest cash crop in early America, And as the tobacco phenomena grew, so too did the products. Advancements were made for processing, curing, and preparing tobacco for long-lasting storage and for mass production. That ultimately gave rise to a slew of different products, with moist smokeless tobacco emerging in the form that we know and love today. MST is a highly specialized product. The cut, the color, the texture, the flavor, and the pack dip spit experience are what really define and differentiate MST from the rest. Copenhagen, the leading MST brand to this day, was introduced as early as 1822. Other brands like Skoal and Beech Nut gained prominence in the early 1900s, and that collectively fostered a dip culture that has endured throughout American history. Dip is associated with masculine Americana. It's for the rugged outdoorsman, someone who is proud of who they are, where they come from, and proud to dip. They have a spit cup in hand and that telltale ring in their back pocket. As we get into the 1960s and 70s, attitudes towards tobacco begin to shift. There's growing awareness of the health risks, especially those associated with combustible cigarettes. Many consumers begin switching away from smoking to smokeless products as public health scrutiny intensifies and smoking bans go into place. MST really takes hold as the original tobacco harm reduction product. Various forms of MST have been developed and marketed over the years. You've got pouched products in the 70s, longer cuts and flavors in the 80s, but the rituals and the traditions of MST have remained the same. While other tobacco categories like cigarettes have experienced rapid decline in the face of intensifying scrutiny and regulation, MST has flourished. Long-cut MST far outpaces sales of other smokeless forms, and it has been significant and sustained increase over the past few decades. The rise of smokeless alternatives over the past decade has also been truly remarkable. In particular, we've seen new market entrants flooding the white pouch nicotine category with an eye towards converting smokers away from cigarettes. We've also seen pretty strong acceptance from FDA when it comes to smokeless products generally. General Snus were the first products to receive modified risk claims, and Zyn, the market-leading nicotine pouch, was authorized through the rigorous PMTA pathway earlier this year. However, with great power comes great responsibility. The category is subject to heightened scrutiny, and it could face regulatory challenges. We've heard a lot today about the child-resistant packaging as an example. This shows that the agency is ready and willing to step in should trends move in an unfavorable direction. I know, as someone who lived through the Juul experience, I'm waiting with bated breath for the latest NYTS youth survey results. But I don't say all of this to give you a history lesson. To me, the past informs the future. And when I think about the future nicotine product landscape, I envision a really diverse marketplace that caters to the full range of needs expressed by adult nicotine consumers. Just like any other consumer good, different people enjoy different things, and there's no one-size-fits-all approach that meets every individual's wants and needs. I support the development of all smoke-free alternatives, and I'm excited to see innovations emerging across the categories. Modern oral products can take many different shapes and forms, and you're going to hear from some of my brilliant peers on this stage today what that looks like. But with that being said, I'm going to focus the remainder of my presentation on the MST consumer and the alternatives that are designed to meet their needs. And that conversation matters because there are a whole lot of dippers in America today. The first chart on the left shows just how large that MST market is. It's billions of dollars in annual sales that have grown 10 times over the past 35 years. And those sales continue to increase, even with the explosion of white nicotine pouches in recent years. The smokeless tobacco user himself has also been really stable. The middle chart shows age, but sex, race, and ethnicity and geography are also very steady. We are talking about males who have been using tobacco products for many years, over-indexed in the South and the Midwest. MST users are also really committed to their form factor. You can see that they far and away prefer long cut as opposed to fine cut or pouches, and that shows a preference and commitment to the pack dip spit experience. So the literature shows that the MST consumer is aware of the health risks that are associated with tobacco use. And for those who cannot or will not quit, they are interested in exploring potential alternatives. So who is providing MST users with a reduced risk product? White nicotine pouches are an oral product alternative, and they are meaningfully different from MST. Whereas MST is an agricultural product with deep flavors, rich color, and high moisture, white pouches are made from granulate. They tend to have more synthetic flavors, and they're relatively dry. While MST is really ritualistic consumption, white pouches are more functional than ritualistic. MST is also offered in a variety of forms, long cut, fine cut pouches, whereas white pouches are, well, pouches. All of these differences ultimately equate to a different user base, with white pouches sourcing over 75% of their consumers from combustibles or vape, with notably higher volumes of women. So, while white nicotine pouches are potential alternatives, they're not really perceived as substitutes for the general MST user. I've pulled a quote from a focus group here that I think really highlights the experience of many MST users. If they can dip, they are going to dip. However, there may be some situations or use occasions where they think they could see themselves swapping in white nicotine. So, much like that dipper, the founders of Black Buffalo couldn't part with the ritual and tradition of their beloved MST. They tried all of the alternatives, but nothing was really meeting their needs. They sought to develop a no-compromise alternative by removing the tobacco leaf and stem. Tens and thousands of hours of research and development later, we have Black Buffalo. Our production process really rides the rails of traditional tobacco production, using farm-cured leafy greens, pharmaceutical-grade nicotine, food-grade ingredients to create both long-cut and pouches that emulate the MST experience. Simply put, our products deliver everything that MST users love and nothing they don't. And our products really stand alone as the truly no-compromise alternative, because you've got that taste, texture, color, nicotine satisfaction, and ritualistic pack, dip, spit design. It's a frictionless like-for-like replacement. Our brand also pays homage to the legacy brands that have come before us, which really resonates with our consumers. We are proud of our foundations, rooted in time-honored traditions, but with a new and innovative lens that represents the future of dip. In this competitive oral product landscape that's currently unfolding, we are compliantly and responsibly answering an unmet and overlooked need. We've been patiently waiting for the review of our timely filed 2020 PMTAs, which earns our company the right to operate, and we've strategically grown our footprint as a key player in this exciting rise of the smokeless alternative space. And now I look forward to hearing more about some of the other innovations to come.
Next, I'd like to introduce Katherine Ilkhani from Dissolve. She's going to talk about the first non-pouch product today, Dissolve.
Hello, everyone. First, I want to thank Azim for giving me the opportunity to be here today and putting together such a wonderful and important event. Today, I want to share how my co-founder and I, two Gen Z founders who lived through and experienced the youth vaping epidemic firsthand, are turning that experience into action. With our novel product, we're combining the best parts of nicotine replacement therapies, the discretion of pouches, and the rapid delivery of vapes to help drive a smoke-free future. I was just 14 when I first picked up a cigarette. At the time, I was living in Iran, where cigarettes were completely stigma-free, accepted, and rarely questioned. There was no education around the dangers of smoking, no warnings, no stigma, no reason to think twice. But that changed when I moved back to the United States in 10th grade, where cigarettes were heavily stigmatized, especially among my generation, and the vape epidemic was just at its peak. So I naturally transitioned to vaping. First it was a Swarren, then it was a Box Mod, then it was a Juul. But what you would see is later on, when I went to college, is big hand-sized disposables in the hands of the majority. Lost Mary, Hyde, Elf Bar being the most popular as far as the ones that I'd constantly see around campus. By senior year, most of my guy friends had ditched their disposables for Zyn, but not a single one of my girlfriends had even considered Zyn. And for me, I had tried everything from pouches to lozenges and gum. None of it mixed well with my system, and I'd get either nauseous or it just wouldn't deliver what my vape did. So I even went back to smoking for some time, thinking since I wouldn't be able to hit a cigarette whenever and wherever I wanted, that way, the way that I can with a vape, maybe then I could actually eventually cut back and quit. And the truth is that I did not want to quit nicotine, I wanted to quit vaping, because nicotine genuinely helps me focus, especially as someone with ADHD, so it didn't feel like something that I needed to give up. What I did want to give up was the way that I was getting it. Especially as a young adult in the workforce, I did not want to be seen carrying around a chunky pink and blue bubblegum raspberry device, and especially not knowing the long-term consequences with zero ingredient transparency or longitudinal data, especially from devices imported from China, was truly anxiety-inducing and mentally taxing. So as you guys can see on the slide, a recent UC Davis published in ACS Central Science just a few months ago found that disposable vapes actually release more toxic metals than cigarettes. One of the devices tested released more lead in a single day of use than 20 packs of cigarettes. The levels were so extreme that one of the researchers thought his instrument was broken when he first saw the data. The toxins they measured included lead, nickel, copper, zinc, chromium, all substances linked to cancer, cardiovascular disease, and neurotoxicity. And the worst part of this all was that materials like chromium and nickel increased nearly 1,000-fold the longer the vape was being used. Now, I'm not a scientist, and I won't stand here pretending to fully grasp what all of that means over the long run, but as someone who was a regular Elf Bar user, I can say that it's deeply concerning. These products are not only illegal and unauthorized, they're exposing millions of young people to toxic metals at levels beyond cigarette smoke. And that's exactly why we started Zolve, because before ever reading this research, we had already seen and lived through the rise of vaping in our own generation, and we saw the gap, that there simply weren't novel oral alternatives designed for the needs of nicotine users who started with vapes. And the real reality as a consumer is that I don't want to spend hours digging through academic journals or squinting at fonts and colors to figure out whether an Elf Bar in front of me is counterfeit or not. And I don't want to gamble with my health on a product that hasn't even been on the market long enough to know its long-term consequences. The most alarming part about all of this is that awareness that FDA even authorizes certain e-cigarettes is shockingly low. Only 10.8% of adults who smoke and 12.7% of youth know this. That means over 48 million people in these two groups, do not know the differences between an FDA-authorized vape and an unregulated disposable device. And this isn't just a Gen Z problem. Ask long-term smokers why they still smoke instead of switching to vaping. And the answer is almost always the same, which is, I've been smoking this long and I'm still alive, so why switch to something new where the long-term risks aren't even proven, and it could potentially be worse. That mindset, that combination of mistrust, confusion, and lack of viable alternatives is exactly what we're solving with Zolve, giving people a safer, transparent, non-inhalable option that they can truly trust. I was only 17 years old in the 2019 spike, in the previous slide. And everyone else who started vaping at the time, like me, is now in their 20s, still vaping, but it's no longer Juul, it's the far more insidious products. That's why we started Dissolve, because while regulators and prohibitionists are still trying to figure out how to solve the century-old problem of smoking, we didn't want to wait another decade for safer, non-inhalable options that would actually work for people like us. Because the reality is that while we know that vaping is 95% less harmful than smoking, the vapes we consider as such are not the ones being predominantly used by our generation. It's the products from the UC Davis study. In fact, the other day, while I was getting dinner with a few of my college friends, each of them had a disposable vape in their hand. When I gave my usual spiel about the difference between a disposable and reusable, it was a completely foreign concept to them. None of them knew the basics of what they were using, and the next time I saw them, only one had switched to a rechargeable device, one had moved to pouches, and the other three were still using disposables. And their justification for this was that pouches make me nauseous and the FDA authorized reusables taste gross and lack flavors. My co-founder and I were sitting in our college study lounge at 2 a.m. when we asked ourselves a very simple question, which is that in a multi-billion-dollar industry, why are the only oral options still just gums, lozenges, and pouches? That led us to another question, which was, what would a novel oral product need to actually prevent relapse for smokers and vapors? We didn't need to wade through thousands of scientific papers to get an answer. We just asked ourselves and our peers, and the response was very clear. Something that delivers nicotine as quickly and smoothly as inhalables, but without the side effects and discomfort of existing oral products. Research later validated exactly what we had concluded, so we came up with the concept. What if we combined a Listerine strip style format absorbed transbuccally with nicotine? The first person we pitched this idea to wasn't an FDA veteran or a tobacco executive. It was the godfather of controlled drug delivery, the founder of a leading pharma company who validated the idea and told us to go for it. At first, we planned to build this product from scratch, but then discovered that the product already existed in Sweden. So we reached out to the company, we sampled it, and after one try, I never touched a vape again. No nausea, no spit, no discomfort, no waste, and no withdrawal symptoms. This is a product that even Thomas Erickson, the inventor of the modern nicotine pouch and arguably the most influential mind behind oral nicotine, has endorsed and invested in. And it was created in Sweden, the first country to achieve smoke-free status. That's when we knew that we couldn't gatekeep this and had to bring it to the United States. We were so impressed, not just by the efficacy, but by the science and R&D, because no other strip brands in Europe even compared, and now we're leading the PMTA process to make it accessible for the millions of others like me who need better options. So as you can see on the slide, it's just a thin film strip with an alginate polymer base derived from sustainably harvested seaweed, tobacco derived with pharmaceutical-grade nicotine. A 2 mg strip is equivalent to a 6 mg pouch, and it is placed under the lip. The initial release happens within 30 seconds, and over 90% of the nicotine is absorbed, or is released within 3 to 5 minutes, after which the strip fully dissolves within a 15-minute time frame, leaving behind zero waste. So most smokers and vapors don't relapse because they lack willpower. They relapse because nicotine withdrawal outruns their aid. In fact, a 2021 study found that withdrawal symptoms to be the top barrier in quitting or even successfully transitioning to an oral harm reduction product. That's why timing is everything. Sprays, for example, land in about 10 to 12 minutes. Gums, lozenges, and pouches, they take 45 to 90. And if you're craving spikes at minute 10, but your aid doesn't fully hit until minute 45, you're basically fighting with one hand tied behind your back. So in a bioequivalence study of 40 smokers, nicotine strips were found to deliver nicotine on par with Nicorette peppermint oral spray, which means that strips can finally bring inhalable level speed into discrete oral format. For Zolve, that unlocks a massive market. The 20 million plus users who are dissatisfied with what already exists and are searching for something cleaner, quicker, more discreet, and sustainable. A recent 2025 WorkPerk study showed significant feedback. And to summarize this, the campaign distributed 30,000 units of strips to nicotine users across 109 different offices in Liverpool, collecting over 5,300 completed questionnaires. Of the 5,300 people who completed the questionnaire, 46 were current cigarette smokers, 35% were vapers, and 11% used nicotine pouches. When asked how likely they were to purchase our product, 64% said that they would buy the product. And the most interesting part was that cigarette smokers happened to be the primary group vouching for it, with the majority saying that it is the only smoke-free product that they believe will help them quit smoking. These are just a few of the many real testimonials that we've received from the WorkPerk study, from smokers and vapors, which are honestly just powerful reminders of the impact that novel delivery formats and harm reduction can have at scale once embraced. Thank you.
So I'd now like to invite the panelists onto the stage. First of all, thank you all for being here and for those insightful presentations. It's always interesting to see how this category is growing and developing, and new minds coming into the field with new ideas and your own perspectives on nicotine and harm reduction. I wanted to start with, actually, Ricky, you talked about nicotine being rebranded. As we've talked about, as your counsel, it is one of those issues that has always been out there, right? Nicotine does not cause the cancer. It's not the element that is causing tobacco-related disease, and yet the law prevents us in many ways from accurately describing nicotine. So if you're marketing a product due to the restrictions around therapeutic claims and modified risk claims, you would not be able to accurately, so to speak, market your product in those types of manners without crossing into violations. And so it kind of puts companies like yours that are innovating in this space and developing products that are arguably less harmful and safer, right? But how do you communicate that? How do you rebrand that when you're limited by how you can speak about these products in that manner? Any thoughts on that?
I think that it's just a matter of time. I mean, if you talk to somebody on the street today and you ask them, what do you know about nicotine? They'll tell you it causes cancer, right? Everybody in this room knows that that's not the case. Andrew Huberman knows that that's not the case. But my mom doesn't, and most people don't. But with influencers, podcasters, and the like, and just general knowledge going out into the zeitgeist, it's a matter of time. It would be amazing if the FDA would rethink things a little bit and actually approach the industry looking for true harm reduction and loosen some of those restrictions, because if a brand can't educate the consumer that their product doesn't cause cancer, or is just much less harmful than a tobacco alternative product, you're really hamstringing the new products out there from gaining the traction that they really should, and getting people to switch from tobacco products to not. So with the earliest signs maybe being that they're going to have a fast track system for some nicotine pouches, maybe that's a sign of good things to come. I sure hope so.
Any other thoughts from the panelists on that? on that point? No? Yeah, no, I definitely think, this is something that is ripe for reassessment at the regulatory level. And so, knock on wood, hopefully something will come through, especially as we looked at these new potential pathways. Katherine, you mentioned how you lived both sides of this situation, being a member of Gen Z, growing up, so to speak, with vaping and nicotine, and now you're a founder building an alternative to tobacco. Is there a fundamental difference with how your generation engages with nicotine, and how does that give you a leverage as you launch a new product?
Yeah, so I think obviously we know that there is a significant difference between the way that my generation perceives nicotine and the way that smokers, because they started off with vaping, not smoking, and so with that comes, they have this ease of access, this convenience, this discretion, so they're, kind of getting a nicotine buzz wherever and whenever, at any time in the day. And flavors as well. That's why that's such a big important thing for them, which is why I also said in my presentation, a lot of my friends who were also part of the vaping epidemic peak don't use FDA authorized and reusables because they lack flavor. And so I think that's like the biggest thing. And so that's something we really keep in mind with Zolve is, how do we tailor this product to really fit the needs and user profile kind of the people in my generation who started off with vaping? And that means, keeping transparency in mind, keeping, flavors in mind, and kind of positioning it in a way where they can trust it and it's not just another illegal product that we're throwing their way.
So how do you deal, and this is a question for the whole panel, for all your products, we are reaching a point where obviously the focus still is harm reduction and getting consumers who are using primarily combustibles to find other ways. And so I think that's probably the reason why you guys are all here. But the reality does show that there are a growing number of people who are never tobacco users, who might be now looking at particularly the oral category and starting nicotine. And as many here have known, the concerns from public health has always been, even if these products are at an absolute level not harmful, so to speak, what about the concern about the gateway? What about the possibility that introducing a never tobacco user to now a nicotine product, which is still addictive, how do you, as a startup company, how do you handle that? How do you measure that? What efforts are you making to ensure that, frankly, your never users may not have access to it or are less likely to want to try your product?
I can try to answer this one. I think what we see right now is this shift from industry control to what sort of everyday people within the United States, the culture, is perceiving. And the shift is happening because of people that they listen to, like Ricky mentioned, Andrew Huberman. There are many people who have a voice and have a platform today who have a particular view. They've done their own research, and that is complicated in the sense that I remember when PMI was doing the initial application along with Swedish Match on the other side for general snus for the PMTA, and of course it was granted, not only PMTA, but they got the MRTP stamp as well for reduced claims. And one of the things that they innovated in, particularly in those applications, was how appealing is your product to people who'd never used nicotine or tobacco products. And it was something quite profound, I think, for FDA to feel reassured that it wouldn't be a gateway. The problem today, I think, is shifting from industry towards the culture, and that's something to be very mindful of. And the second thing that I think we see from a sort of psychographical need. Like, why does, the typical user for the last 10, 15 years in the US who smoke is, the single mom, people from the Black Hispanic community, construction workers, taxi drivers. It's not necessarily the educated sort of apex predator, if you know what I mean. And one of the things that we've seen in terms of a shift is people who work in high-end finance, people within entrepreneurship and startup and the tech community, and also the biohacking community. And they've never really used any tobacco product, and they're using it. And I think the good question is, like, why is that happening? There might be many different reasons for it. I think one of them is that, by and large, a lot of these people have traditional jobs. They, things got to be worked up the next day. Kids got to be going to school, but you go to bed later. You stay watching YouTube. You watch something that basically you don't get enough sleep and you don't get enough focus, and your brain is always wired, or to a higher degree than 10, 15 years ago. And so they've instinctively looked and heard about nicotine, and in its pure form, they do their own research. And that's kind of like the situation. There's this arguably this societal need right now for focus and to getting things done. And with the shift from industry towards what the culture is doing, that complicates things. And I think one of the interesting things beyond the needs and what's happening in the industry is the Secretary of Health and Human Services have come out and made statements that we've never seen anybody, I think, in the Western world previously say, I think outside of Sweden and the UK actually, that nicotine does not cause cancer, there are safe ways to consume nicotine, things that we wouldn't even think a regulator would talk about. And so all of this coming together, it's going to be interesting to see. I don't think anybody has the true answer for the implications of it, but these are things that we've seen. Yeah.
It's perfectly legitimate for the FDA and others to worry that, okay, if we authorize a much cleaner product to put it on the market, how do we know that 12 months from now all of those people won't have started dual using cigarettes or something else? They won't go up the continuum of risk. It's perfectly legitimate. Good post-market surveillance is the answer. So many, again, companies in this room have products on market. They have good systems in place for speaking to their customers regularly to understand what products they're using, dual use, poly use, transitions in and out of use of products. And that's the kind of evidence that I think FDA is looking for to give that reassurance that if you authorize Note or Resolve or Mister, that 12 months later they will either be exclusively using these things or maybe dual using other, like maybe each other's products, staying within the clean oral nicotine product space and not going up the continuum into something combustible. So good post-market surveillance, good regular contact with your customers, those systems in place to give constant reassurance to FDA that everything is working as intended.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think post-market surveillance is going to be a key tool that I hope FDA implements if it develops and comes, moves forward with the streamlined PMTA process. And on that note, Chris, you're one of the leading behavioral scientists in this field. And, we're all basing this off of the same media reports that we've seen that FDA, as I mentioned in my presentation, that FDA may be looking at reducing the burden for manufacturers scientifically, potentially not requiring switching studies. How does one, let's say that happens on some level, how would you advise companies in the space who still have to meet the APPH standard? What types of evidence could be used in lieu of switching studies in order to demonstrate that the product meets the public health standard?
Well, first of all, I'd advise companies not to change course on the basis of media reports, wait for the FDA to speak. And hopefully when FDA speak, it will be clear, concise. There'll be few, if any, questions, but I think more realistic is going to be some questions will be answered and there'll be many more questions, some of them legal, as you say. So the first piece of advice is don't change your strategy or recommit resources on the basis of a Reuters article, as good as and respectful as Reuters are, wait for FDA to speak, and that may be in the next 4, 8, 12 weeks, could be. Hopefully they give more clarity. As someone who, as you say, we do these studies, it's always been important for me to understand the likelihood that 1%, 10%, 50% of people who start using, again, one of these guys' products 6 weeks, 12 weeks, 3, 6 months later are no longer smoking cigarettes. So it's not just to establish the rate, the proportion of people who completely transition or substantially reduce their cigarette consumption, but it's also important to understand the speed of that transition, whether it's a day, a week, a month, etc., 6 months. So from a behavioral perspective, there's so much important information from these studies. If FDA decides they don't want that information, I find it strange, because part of APPH for the last 10 years has been to characterize the size of the benefit and set it against the size of the risk. And admittedly, we're seeing much consistent low levels of risk to youth from federal data, and we hope that continues and goes down, of course. Obviously, there's now an absence, a data void. So at least for this year, we won't know how the risk has changed. But I have two perspectives on this. One is that the data you get from such studies are so informative about the public health contribution of these products. And then there's the regulator saying, or maybe saying, that information is not now necessary to quantify APPH. And again, I don't know what the APPH calculation looks like without quantifying benefit to adults. So FDA are going to do what they're going to do, and we'll see exactly in maybe in a couple of weeks or months what they're asking now as part of the streamlined process. But and maybe it's a case that they say, okay, not for pre-market, but maybe post-market, there is a need for you to, as in having a system in place to learn from your customers what impact it's having on their tobacco use and health post-marketing. So the short answer is wait for FDA to speak, and then we can all regroup and see what FDA is saying and know where to go from there.
Yeah, totally. I think it's we need FDA to issue a guidance document or potentially propose rulemaking before we can give any real guidance on how that may play out. And to me, the requirement for switching studies, so to speak, has always been one of those kind of weird things, right? I mean, on the one hand, the need to show that smokers and tobacco users are going to, on a population level, use an alternative is critical to APPH, but it's effectively has always required companies in this space to prove cessation. And cessation is a claim that we can't even make about these products, right? You can't actually claim, even if you're successful in a switching study in showing that smokers will switch or quit. That's not a thing that you can say about your product because it's not an NRT or cessation product. So I digress. I know we only have 3 minutes left. I didn't want to give a chance to the audience. Is there, Derek? Get some microphones up here. The Champs trade show?
Yeah.
He's a champion.
Which is as known people that don't know, it's the so-called counterculture thing. And just to give you a sense of what you have at Champs, you have every type of psychoactive substance drifting around in the air. You have all sorts of sex toy things on display. You have psychedelic gummies and nitrous oxide inhalants and whatever you want. I went there, believe it or not, and went with a colleague from the FDA. And my only question to him was, is anything here legal? I'm mentioning that because the FDA said there's no capability in the world of them shutting this stuff down. And this is just innovation, it's the counterculture, and just let it run. And I spoke to a lot of the people selling stuff, and I said, what happens if you get closed down? He said, well, we'll do something else next year. I mention that because that was sort of the spirit, I'm afraid, that I started getting out of what some of the things Shem was talking about where's Shem? Functional and therapeutic stuff which has no background in science or medicine or public health. And whereas many people may find that a bit of an annoyance to have to go through that, there are reasons we do it, because it protects people's lives. And if we fail and we continue to say, well, everything from theanine to God knows what, just put it in a pouch, what's going to happen is we're going to destroy the nicotine pouch business with great certainty. At exactly the same time, it has the greatest potential to end smoking and provide the benefits to people's brain, which I also completely support. And I think people haven't listened to Hubem, and they really do need to listen to Hubem, because he is a neuroscientist, and many in industry are not listening to him adequately. So my concerns are really that we have to be, just because you can do something from an innovation point of view, doesn't mean you should do it. There are things called bioethics. These are not normal consumer products. They're products going into human bodies with effects on people's brains and lungs and everything else. And I think it does behove people, when they're thinking about innovating in a new era, to make sure that they actually have got the science right, and they go through, as tedious it is, the regulatory process. Otherwise, we're going to undermine the very powerful products that we are starting to see emerge. Sorry to be so blunt about that. But secondly, actually, I'm not sorry. Second point about child-resistant containers, and I really thought Chris gave a very powerful talk. My only plea there, not to the sort of the new product area, but to the traditional folk in everybody in the pouch business, is what McCary said is absolutely right. And I think everybody here knows that you should have child-resistant protection. I'm sure that Attorney General Miller will recognize, as a consumer rights advocate, that he's probably fought for years to make sure we have child-proof prescription, OTC, household chemicals, detergent pads, herbal remedies, vitamins, cosmetics, household cleaners. We've accepted this for 50 years. If I was sitting in an industry and I heard McCary say that, you know what I'd do? I'd go back to my R&D people and say, I want this launched tomorrow. No fuss, no regulatory challenge. Don't bring the lawyers on board to go and challenge it in the court, because I'm sure you'll find some fancy way to challenge it. Do it, because it's right and it's going to protect the category. So I want to just hear from some of the folk here how they're going to respond to what McCary said, which, as I said, is intrinsically right, and we've accepted it since 1967, when it was first applied to aspirin, after all. Finally, and I don't know if my friend Sud is here, but hopefully this is the time Sud will stand up and say something. The real power of these nicotine pouches that he and I share is the fact that it will save the lives of people getting oral cancer in South Asia. I didn't hear this mentioned once. Yes, you can use it all for your fancy, nice things here in the US to have people have a great feeling about their alertness, which I don't need more alertness, basically. But you'll actually end oral cancer in South Asia if you put your minds to thinking about how you can break into the markets of Bangladesh, Pakistan, India, and Sri Lanka. And the costs and consequences of that for the people, the poorest people at the bottom of the socioeconomic ladder, are enormous. I think we need to see a greater sense of social responsibility, and there's a business to be made by tackling this, rather than going for high-end, very nice ways of having some 20-something person have a little bit of alertness to be able to do their work.
Any thoughts on that?
Was there a question there? You did mention child-proof packaging, and this is one of the benefits of just the timing of where we're at. We haven't cut molds for this product, so we heard the FDA's statement, and have been talking to our advisors. And our current solution is that you have to actually hit 2 buttons here on the side to release the depression, to get the spray out. Otherwise, it's locked, which also locks it in your pocket. That's a benefit. But we're looking for like those kind of simple, elegant solutions, because not everybody's going to have an electronic device in your, packaging to do an unlock. But yeah, we hear the FDA, right? And we're trying to follow everything by the book. And we just hope that they hear us, that people want alternative solutions.
Just a short one on that one. Thank you so much for your statements. And we're startups, limited funding, limited ability for everything. And I think with regards to the South Asian sort of the Indian peninsula, if you want, those countries, Bangladesh, Pakistan, India, that's something that is for sure in our minds, and the intention is to move to these countries, including North Africa, which also has a culture for this. Being Swedish, I've seen this transformative effect of these products. I think the facts are that Sweden probably is the only real proof of concept we have for real, population switch. But it's more of I think, a concern for the big players like BAT and PMI to put hand and mouth together and sort of do not only where the money is, which is the US, of course. And the second thing, when it comes to childproof, and I'll be quick, right now, I think it's very important in 2025 to ask, where do things come from? They don't come from a vacuum. Philip Morris have Zyn, and Zyn is the only approved product, and it happens to be, to my knowledge, the only childproof packaging. And the way the world sometimes works is that it comes from a vacuum because somebody's spoken to somebody of influence. And it's an extremely convenient time for them to build up forces and barriers for other people to come in, potentially blow a small problem that is a real problem, but maybe not. Now everybody's eyeballs are on this problem, but it's a very effective way for a large company to build up barriers and effectively deflect competition. And that's something that should be in the context, I think, when things like that come out of nowhere the last 2 weeks and everybody keeps talking about it. It doesn't mean that it's not important. It just means that the industry works in a way, it's a capitalistic system. People are, the intentions are important, but also the reasons why certain things happen. And I just wanted to put that out there.
All right. One last final question.
Hi, my name is Helen Redman. I write for Filter, and we cover tobacco harm reduction pretty extensively. And I'm going to be almost as blunt as Derek, but probably not as blunt. And I would ask all of you in this category to not be dunking on the other categories, in particular vaping. That is a huge mistake. That gives cover to those who are opposing tobacco harm reduction. Vaping is still 95% safer. It is the reason millions of people around the world have quit smoking. So I'm asking you, do not dunk on vaping in order to promote your oral product. You don't have to do that. Again, it gives the opponents more, gives them the ability to come after all of the categories. So I'm asking you, please don't do that. And I do have a question. I'm also a social worker, and I work with people who are trying to make the switch. And we know that vaping, the ritual, there's a important drug ritual with oral, taking in, inhalation and exhalation and touching it and the vapor. It's very, very powerful and it's very enjoyable. So I'm wondering, with your products, how do you bridge that? How can you convince somebody who's very invested in the ritual of inhalation and exhalation to adopt your products? Because I've tried offering the pouches to people in my group, and it just doesn't do it. It's like the patch. It just doesn't. So I'm wondering if you've thought about that and strategies to help people use your products that are coming online.
I can go ahead and answer that. So, at least for us, our approach isn't really to get those people who are, die-hard vapors or vapors who really like that inhalation component to switch over to our product. If you like it so much, do that. And we totally acknowledge the fact that vaping is 95% less harmful than cigarettes. But we kind of are positioning it more for people who like that inhalation a lot, but because of the rapid nicotine absorption, nicotine delivery. And so that's what we're providing with this product, is kind of that mimicking that quick buzz of inhalables that inhalable products offer.
I just want to say thank you for your comment and question. I mean, I think the more high level you speak, the more you start to see things clearly. And I think it was a very important point. And there is a need for a lot of different varieties of products. And one of the issues we've had as an industry has been a lack of innovation, frankly, because of the rugged past of the industry. And it's been a black box for investors, and without funds, things can happen. But the truth is that vaping has done many good things as well, and it's not the enemy. And I think that should be acknowledged as well. It's not a risk-free product. It has its drawbacks. But it's a very important point you made, and I just wanted to thank you for it.
Yeah, I think I'll just end on the note. I think we're all in agreement here that we need to have more options and varieties for all consumers, for all adult smokers, because it's not one size fits all, right? Some people will gravitate towards vaping products, open systems, disposables. Others will gravitate towards pouch products, sprays, lozenges. And it's important that we have a diverse marketplace that offers consumers a variety of choices so that they can find the right fit for them to help them quit. So with that, I will start the coffee break, I think. Thank you.